They told her to wait outside. Just 7 words. "Captain Daniels, we need you to wait outside." But those 7 words didn't just sideline a pilot. They lit the match that burned an empire to the ground. Maya Daniels had logged over 15,000 flight hours across 5 continents. She had trained in war zones, led rescue missions, and landed jets through storms that turned veterans pale. But on a crisp December morning at O'Hare Airport, what stopped her wasn't weather or engine failure. It was a decision made in a boardroom by men who couldn't see past their own reflections. And here's the part they never saw coming. Within weeks of telling her to wait outside, Maya Daniels would expose a web of lies so deep, so dangerous, it would ground one of America's oldest airlines forever. But this isn't just a story about planes or power. It's about the moment you realize silence is complicity. That some doors aren't meant to be opened, they're meant to be kicked off the hinges. So what happened after they told her to step outside? Stay with me, because the real turbulence was just beginning. The sun hadn't yet touched the horizon when Maya Daniels stepped into the crew lounge at O'Hare. The air was thick with the smell of strong coffee and flight jackets still damp from winter fog. She walked in with her pilot's bag in tow, uniform pressed to perfection, 4 gold stripes gleaming on each sleeve like quiet medals of hard-earned respect. No one said it, but every head turned. She was a black woman in a cockpit, a rarity so stark that even now, in 2025, she was often mistaken for a flight attendant or gate agent. At 37, she had done what most never imagined, graduated top of her class from the Air Force Academy, served 8 years flying military transports through Afghan mountain ranges, transitioned to commercial aviation, 15,000 hours in the sky. And now, on this cold December morning, she was about to fly her first mission as senior captain for Meridian Airlines, one of the most prestigious carriers in the country. She should have been proud. She should have been focused on the flight path, the crew briefing, the small but meaningful ritual of settling into a new uniform with her name stitched above her heart. But something felt off the moment she walked through the lounge door. Conversations paused, eyes lingered too long. She felt it not as hostility, but as hesitation. A quiet question humming beneath the surface. Is she really supposed to be here? She made her way to the coffee machine, poured a cup, and stirred in cream slowly. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "You'll have to be twice as good to get half as far, baby, and even then, they'll still make you wait outside." She never knew how literal those words would become. The man who greeted her next wore the same gold stripes, Captain Richard Whitmore, mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, and a handshake that lasted a second too short. "You must be Captain Daniels," he said with a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'll be your check captain for the next few weeks." She nodded. "Yes, sir. I've reviewed the flight path, studied the SFO approach charts, and we're expecting light turbulence over the rock." He nodded back. "Good. The crew is in briefing room C. I'll meet you there shortly." She entered the room a few minutes later. 6 flight attendants and her co-pilot, James Chen, were already seated. James stood up when she arrived. "Captain Daniels," he said with a smile. "Looking forward to flying with you." But before Maya could respond, 2 more men entered, Richard Whitmore and Thomas Barrett, the executive director of operations. Barrett was tall, with a deep crease between his brows and a clipboard clutched tight like it held courtroom evidence. "There's been a change of plans," he said, eyes never meeting Maya's. "Captain Whitmore will be taking command of Flight 207 today. Captain Daniels, we need you to wait outside while we reassign you." The words fell like a trap door under her feet. Wait outside. As if she hadn't passed every test, as if her presence was optional. "May I ask why?" she said, keeping her voice even. "I was scheduled for this flight." Barrett glanced at Whitmore before replying. "It's a matter of experience. San Francisco's a challenging approach." "With all due respect," Maya interrupted, "I've landed in SFO 73 times over the past decade." Barrett's tone hardened. "This isn't up for discussion. Please wait outside." Silence spread through the room like spilled fuel. Everyone watched. No one spoke. Maya felt heat rise behind her collar but held steady. She nodded, placed her flight packet on the table, and walked out with the same composure she'd used to land jets in sandstorms. The hallway felt colder than before. She leaned against the wall, fingers tightening around her coffee cup, her breath slow and measured. She had flown through war zones, carried lives in her hands, but somehow the quiet rejection behind polished glass doors, kept deep because it wasn't about skill, it wasn't about protocol. It was about who they believed belonged. And in that moment, Maya realized something she would never forget. Sometimes, the most dangerous turbulence doesn't come from the sky. It comes from the ground. The next morning came with less anticipation and more calculation. Maya arrived early, dressed the same, composed the same, but the spark that lit her eyes the day before had shifted into something colder, quieter. She was no longer flying Flight 207 as captain. She had been reassigned to shadow Flight 422 to Seattle. No command, no crew of her own, just a jump seat behind the cockpit, watching others do the job she had already mastered. They said it was to acclimate her to Meridian's procedures, but she knew better. It wasn't onboarding, it was containment. As she made her way through the terminal, her mind ticked through every time she'd seen this game before. They didn't have to ground you outright. They just made the runway disappear beneath your feet, one reassignment at a time. Captain Harold Wilson greeted her with a grunt and a nod. Early 60s, thinning gray hair, posture stiff like an old doorframe that never quite closed. He didn't offer a handshake or a smile, only a look that hovered somewhere between suspicion and disapproval. "You'll be observing," he said, not even bothering with pleasantries. "No input unless I ask for it." "Understood," Maya replied evenly. She'd met men like Wilson her entire career, the kind who believed the cockpit was sacred ground, passed down through bloodlines and backroom deals, men who resented that someone like her had dared to claim space in their air. Wilson's words weren't loud, they were like cold wind through a cracked window, constant, quiet, cutting. During the pre-flight checklist, Wilson narrated every step with exaggerated precision, as if teaching a student who had just wandered in off the street. "We run checklists by the book here," he said while flipping switch or shortcuts. "No improvisation." Maya nodded, offering nothing more than calm compliance. "Standardization is the foundation of safety," she replied. He didn't respond. The co-pilot, Peter Lawson, a younger man with restless eyes and nervous energy, avoided at either of them too long. Maya caught him glancing at her once, sympathy flickering behind his eyes before vanishing like vapor. She settled into the jump seat and observed as they taxied out. The flight was short, just under 2 hours, but every minute felt like a silent argument. Wilson seemed determined to prove something, explaining each control input as if Maya had never flown before, stating the obvious in a tone that hovered between condescension and dismissal. She remained still, notebook in hand, taking mental notes not of Wilson's technique, though it was sharp, but of the culture he represented. Midway through the descent into Seattle, something shifted. Wilson entered the wrong frequency for approach control. It was minor, an easy fix, but it would delay their clearance and confuse the tower. Peter didn't catch it. Or maybe he did but didn't have the nerve to correct it. Maya hesitated for half a breath, then leaned forward slightly. "Captain, I believe Seattle approach is on 28.5 today, not 124.75. Wilson froze. The cockpit, already quiet, dropped into a dead silence, his jaw clenched. Slowly he checked the chart. Then, even more slowly, he adjusted the radio. "That's correct," he said, each word dragged from his throat like they cost him something. "Thank you, Captain Daniels." She nodded. "Any time, sir." The rest of the landing went smoothly, but the tension remained, crackling between the three of them like static in the air. As they taxied to the gate, Wilson spoke again, not turning around. "You have a good eye. Most wouldn't have caught that." "Thank you," Maya said, unsure if it was meant as a compliment or a concession. He didn't stop there. "Don't misunderstand. One good catch doesn't make you Meridian material. This airline has standards, traditions. Not everyone fits." It wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. Maya met his words with silence, letting them hang in the air like smoke from a smoldering fire. "With respect, Captain," she said finally. "Traditions evolve, they have to." Wilson turned then, just enough for their eyes to meet. His were pale blue, cold as frost. "Not at Meridian, they don't." The words weren't just about her. They were about a culture that feared change more than failure. About a legacy built on exclusion wrapped in the language of excellence. After they disembarked, Maya didn't wait for parting words. She walked away from the aircraft with her head high and her jaw set. The message was clear. They weren't going to fire her. They were going to bury her under layers of quiet disrespect until she walked away on her own. But she wasn't leaving. Not yet. Not before she understood just how deep the rot went. Not before she knew exactly what she was fighting. Because while Wilson's words had been cold, they had also been familiar. And Maya Daniels had learned long ago how to fly through storms. Back in Chicago, the routine continued, or at least the performance of it did. Maya kept showing up, punctual and polished, assigned to more shadow flights, more jump seats, more silent corners of cockpits, where her experience was ignored and her presence treated like a formality. She took it all in quietly, methodically, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had learned that some truths require patience to be heard. And while others were busy trying to clip her wings, Maya was charting a flight path of her own, one they couldn't see coming. One morning, after a particularly tense briefing with another dismiss's captain, she asked to visit the maintenance hangar between flights. She framed it as a professional interest, getting to know Meridian's aircraft protocols, understanding how the ground teams operate. No one questioned her request. That was their mistake. The hangar smelled of grease, cold steel, and long hours. It was a different world than the sterile glass offices upstairs. A world where the safety of thousands depended on every bolt being tight, every record accurate. She walked among rows of resting aircraft, each one looming like a sleeping giant, and approached a man inspecting an engine with the steady rhythm of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. He was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, with deep lines around his eyes and hands that looked like they'd held more truth than most ledgers. His name patch read, Jefferson. "Captain Daniels," Maya said, offering her hand. "Just here to learn. I used to do my own checks in the military." The man looked up, studied her for a beat, then nodded and shook her hand. "Marcus Jefferson. Been here 23 years, Detroit born." That last part made Maya smile. "East Side," she said. "Dad worked at the post office. You?" "West Side," Marcus replied, eyes narrowing with curiosity. "My mom ran a daycare out of our house. Small world." Something shifted in his expression. It was small, but Maya knew the moment. It was trust, or at least the beginning of it. She asked questions, normal ones at first, about their maintenance cycles, the planes most often in rotation, turnaround times. Marcus answered casually, but she could hear something beneath his words. Tension, caution, a kind of rehearsed detachment, like a man who knew how far he could speak before the ground gave way. She waited until they were alone by the tail of a parked 737 before lowering her voice. "Marcus, has anyone asked you to sign off on something that didn't feel right?" The question hung there, heavy and dangerous. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned on his tool cart, looked around the hangar, then said, "You asking as a company rep or as someone who wants the truth?" "The truth," Maya said. "Always." Maya said, "Always." Things have changed. New management's cutting corners, pushing us to speed up, overlook little stuff. Checks that used to be mandatory are now optional. "Is that legal?" she asked. "Legal?" Marcus scoffed. "They make it look legal. Rewrite the procedures just enough to dodge accountability. But I'll tell you this, I wouldn't put my family on some of these planes." The chill that passed through Maya had nothing to do with the hangar's temperature. She felt it settle in her chest, a confirmation of a fear she hadn't yet spoken aloud. "Anyone ever speak up?" "They used to," Marcus said. "Not anymore. Last guy who raised concerns, Paul Decker, had an accident a few weeks later. Fell off a platform, broke his back. Year over." "Was it really an accident?" Maya asked. Marcus didn't answer. He just looked at her, eyes steady. That look said more than words ever could. That night, Maya opened a new notebook. She wrote everything down, times, dates, names, observations. She labeled it Flight Log Truth. Every day afterward, she added to it. A detail here, a comment there. She began talking to more people, not interrogating, just listening. A young flight attendant named Lauren who mentioned how complaints about faulty cabin pressure were ignored. A veteran gate agent who whispered that schedules were being manipulated to avoid federal crew rest requirements. A dispatcher who hinted that flight load data was sometimes adjusted to meet targets. Maya never asked for more than people were willing to give. She didn't push. She just paid attention. Every conversation was a single drop. Some spoke cautiously, some not at all, but in the way they looked at her, a tired kind of hope. A desperate need for someone to do something, finally. By the end of the second week, Maya had a dozen pages of handwritten notes and a flash drive with copies of maintenance records that didn't match their logs. She stored it all in a folder labeled with a name she hadn't said aloud in years, Dad, because he was the one who taught her that doing the right thing rarely feels good in the moment, but it always feels right later. And deep down, Maya knew. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was bigger than uniforms, bigger than pride. This was about lives. Hundreds of them. Thousands. People who trusted the name on their boarding pass, never knowing how close they were flying to disaster. Maya was no longer just documenting injustice. She was preparing for impact. And soon, someone, somewhere, was going to feel the first drop of the storm she'd begun. The notice came with no warning. Just a cold email from HR, wrapped in corporate language that tried to sound polite but couldn't hide the message underneath. Captain Daniels, you are being placed on temporary administrative duty pending internal review. Report to Office 14E at headquarters tomorrow. No mention of why, no explanation, no voice to deliver the words, just pixels on a screen. But Maya didn't need an explanation. She'd seen the signs building for weeks. The sidelong glances, the nervous silences, the quiet whispers when she entered a room. They were trying to sideline her again, only this time under the banner of protocol. The next morning, she walked into the HR wing of Meridian's headquarters dressed like it was any other flight day. 4 gold stripes, polished shoes. Hair pulled back sharp and clean. She was greeted not by a superior, but by a young man barely out of college, his handshake damp with uncertainty, eyes unable to meet hers. He handed her a visitor's badge, standard assignment during reassignment review. Maya thanked him without emotion and took her seat. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of printers and the distant click of heels. She opened the first folder, her fingers moving automatically, but her mind fully alert. They thought they were pushing her to the background. They thought sitting her behind a desk would silence her. But they didn't know what she'd been preparing for. They told me to sit down and wait. But they had no idea what I'd been preparing for. That afternoon, while reviewing flight performance logs, she saw Lauren Kim walking past in a Meridian blazer, her stride stiff, eyes down. Maya stood and followed her into the hallway. "Lauren," she called softly. The younger woman turned, surprise flickering across her face before softening into recognition. "Captain," she whispered. "You okay?" "Fine, paper duty," Naya said dry. Lauren bit her lip, looked around, then stepped closer. "I've been meaning to talk to you," she said. "I didn't know if I should, but after what they did to you." She pulled out her phone and showed Maya a photo. It was grainy but clear. A cracked pressure valve on a cabin wall. "Flight 336 to Toronto 2 months ago," Lauren explained. "The cabin crew noticed the fluctuation and reported it. Maintenance logged it as minor, but the photo shows a visible fracture. They flew the aircraft anyway." Maya's pulse quickened. "Did you report it?" "I documented it. Sent it to my supervisor. No reply. That's when I started saving everything." She scrolled through more images. Valve readings, temperature anomalies, maintenance logs with missing initials. "I was scared," Lauren admitted. "I still am, but if something happens," and I said nothing. "You did the right thing," Maya said firmly, "and you're not alone." They exchanged contact information and agreed to meet that night. Back in her cubicle, Maya's heart raced. Not with fear, but focus. Every piece was falling into place. That evening, in her apartment, the dining table had become a battlefield. Lauren sat across from her, a manila folder in hand, while Maya laid out a growing network of notes, copies, digital files, and anonymous tips, each one a thread, each one pointing to something larger, something dangerous. "How long have you been tracking all this?" Lauren asked, wide-eyed. "Since my second week," Maya said. "I thought it was just bias, but it's bigger. They're cutting corners everywhere, and they're silencing the people who see it." "What happens next?" Lauren asked. Maya looked at her, and for a moment saw herself 10 years ago. Hopeful, uncertain, just beginning to understand the cost of integrity build. She said, "And when it's ready, we bring it all forward." That night, Maya stayed up until 2 a.m., cross-referencing safety protocols with Lauren's photos and the data from Marcus. She found matching patterns, same inspection gaps, same aircraft ID numbers, same supervisors signing off without documentation. It was no longer speculation. It was a pattern, a deliberate one. Maya documented everything, creating multiple backups, hard drives, cloud storage, a secure email to her sister Zoe, labeled just in case. She wasn't naive. She knew what she was walking into. She knew that blowing the whistle in an industry built on silence would come with consequences. But some truths are too dangerous to bury, and the risk of staying silent had become far greater than the risk of speaking. At 3 a.m., she stood by her apartment window, looking out over the quiet city. Somewhere, jets were lifting into the night sky. People were sleeping, trusting that someone was watching over them. Maya closed her eyes and whispered to no one, "I'm watching now. I won't let this go." And just like that, the storm she'd been building finally found its shape. It wasn't just rising, it was ready. The summons came just after lunch, delivered by a trembling assistant who wouldn't meet her eyes. "Captain Daniels, you've been requested in the executive boardroom immediately." Requested. The word echoed in Maya's mind like the chime before a cabin drops into turbulence. She rose slowly, buttoned her blacker, gathered nothing but the slim leather folder she'd prepared the night before. Her heart was steady, not from lack of fear, but from a clarity sharpened by sleepless nights, crossed lines, and the quiet strength of knowing she had done everything right. As she walked down the corridor, she passed colleagues who quickly looked away, and others who offered brief nods of solidarity. The rumors had spread like jet fuel. Something was coming, and Maya Daniels was at the center of it. The doors to the boardroom stood tall and dark, like gates to a place that had never been meant for her. She opened them without knocking. Inside sat 5 men. Thomas Barrett at the head, Richard Whitmore beside him, Harold Wilson leaning back with arms crossed, and 2 men. No one invited her to sit. Barrett folded his hands in front of him. "Captain Daniels," he began, "we're aware that you've been conducting conversations with multiple employees across departments and accessing areas beyond your assigned clearance." Maya remained silent. He continued, "You've also been collecting documents and, based on internal monitoring, communicating with external parties regarding company operations." He leaned back. "This is a direct violation of your confidentiality agreement." Still, Maya said nothing. Whitmore jumped in next, his tone sharp. "We'd like to give you an opportunity to resolve this without escalation. If you agree to resign voluntarily and sign this non-disclosure agreement, you'll receive a severance package and a neutral reference. But any refusal will be considered grounds for immediate termination with cause." One of the lawyers slid a thick envelope across the table toward her. No eye contact, no hesitation, just the cold mechanics of a system that had silenced countless voices before. They thought they were handing her a gag order. She handed them an earthquake. Maya placed her leather folder on the table. Calmly, deliberately, she opened it and removed 3 neatly labeled documents. She didn't push forward. 9 o'clock this morning, a formal report was submitted to the Federal Aviation Administration, detailing violations of maintenance protocols, falsified inspection logs, and testimonies from multiple employees regarding pressure to overlook safety risks. That report includes photographic evidence, digital flight logs, and internal memos dating back over 6 months. The room froze. Maya's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." Maya ignored him. At noon today, the Chicago Tribune received a separate package with the same information. Their investigative team has already begun interviews. They're particularly interested in a technician named Paul Decker and the circumstances surrounding his accident. Wilson sat forward, his voice rising. This is blackmail. Maya looked directly at him. No, Captain Wilson. This is accountability. She turned her gaze back to Barrett. And just so we're clear, a third copy of all documents has been secured off-site, with instructions to release to national news outlets and international aviation authorities if anything happens to me or anyone who's come forward. One of the lawyers leaned toward Barrett and whispered something urgent. Barrett's face, usually composed, was beginning to lose its lips pale. What do you want? He finally asked. You want money? You want a promotion? Maya shook her head. I want change. I want every aircraft with outstanding maintenance issues grounded immediately. I want an independent safety audit conducted. And I want written guarantees that no employee involved in bringing this forward will be punished. That would bankrupt the company. Maya didn't blink. As opposed to what happens when the FAA pulls your operating certificate or when a single passenger learns they flew on a plane your own text said wasn't safe. Silence again. The kind that feels like a countdown. Barrett turned to the lawyers. One of them opened a laptop, typing furiously. The other began reviewing the documents Maya had brought. Minutes passed. Nobody moved. Maya didn't sit, she didn't flinch, she just waited, steady, unshaken, while the weight of truth filled the room like cabin pressure ready to blow. Finally Barrett spoke. We'll need time to consult. We have 1 hour, Maya interrupted, her voice like landing gear locking into place. After that, I call every contact I have, and this becomes public by nightfall. Barrett stared at her, eyes hard, but the fight was draining out of him. He nodded once, curt and resentful. Maya gathered her folder, turned, and walked out of the boardroom. Behind her, the door closed with a soft click. But the echoes would last a lifetime. Outside, the sky stretched wide and blue over the city. She walked back to her temporary desk with the quiet composure of someone who knew the storm had begun. And this time, she wasn't the one being grounded. This time, she was the one clearing the runway, for truth to finally take off. The collapse didn't happen overnight, but when it came, it moved faster than anyone expected. Within 48 hours of Maya's meeting with the board, Meridian Airlines announced an emergency grounding of nearly 40% of its fleet. Flights were canceled across the country, passengers stranded in terminals from Boston to LAX, and the headlines hit with the weight of a thunderclap. Whistleblower exposes major airline safety breach. News anchors repeated Maya's name with awe and urgency. Former employees began coming forward, one after another, each adding pieces to the puzzle. Maintenance shortcuts, retaliations, ignored warnings. It wasn't just about a few bad decisions. It was a culture, a system, a machine that valued speed and profit over the very lives it was entrusted to protect. The FAA launched a formal investigation within days. Inspectors swarmed Meridian's facilities, combing through hangars, digital records, flight manifests, and maintenance logs. The violations were worse than anyone had feared. Falsified documents, skipped safety checks, pressure from upper management to overlook red flags. Within a month, the FAA revoked Meridian's operating certificate. The company issued a carefully worded statement about temporary certificate, but the truth was clear. Meridian Airlines was grounded. For good. In the weeks that followed, Maya became a reluctant symbol. She hadn't done it for recognition, she hadn't wanted her name on banners or her face on magazine covers. But the industry needed a reckoning, and her story had become the fire that sparked it. She received job offers from every major airline in the country, executive roles, lead captain positions, consulting gigs. And not just because she was capable, they had always known that, but because now her integrity shone like a beacon in an industry desperate to course correct. She chose to wait. She needed time to breathe, to think, to rediscover the quiet within herself. One morning, her sister Zoe called, her voice buzzing with something that sounded like pride wrapped in disbelief. "You've got a letter from the FAA," she said. "It's an invitation. Maya opened the envelope later that day and read it in silence. The FAA was forming a new National Oversight Council, focused on safety, ethics, and whistleblower protection. And they wanted her on it. Not as a token, not as a formality, but as a voice that had proven beyond doubt that she could see what others chose to ignore. She didn't say yes right away. Not because she doubted herself, but because she understood what it meant. Her life was no longer just about flying planes. It was about changing what flying meant, for everyone. And as she sat by her apartment window, sipping tea and watching a contrail fade into the distance, she smiled to herself and whispered, "They once told me the sky was the limit. Now I know it was never the sky. It was their ceiling, and I flew through it." Across the industry, ripple effects spread like heat waves across a runway. Other airlines began internal audits. Boardrooms held late-night meetings. Whispered fears turned into policy reviews. Anonymous surveys became standard. And for the first time in a long time, pilots, mechanics, attendant, people who had once felt invisible, began to believe their voices might actually matter. At Atlantic Airways, one of the fastest-growing airlines on the East Coast, the CEO reached out directly. Not a recruiter, not a liaison. Him, in person. "We don't want to use you as a face," he said. "We want to listen, learn, build something better. With you in the cockpit and at the table." Maya visited their facilities. She met the staff. She asked hard questions and got honest answers. She reviewed their safety protocols, their leadership structure, and most importantly, their culture. And slowly she began to feel something she hadn't felt in years. 3 months later, she stood at the front of Atlantic's new operations center, wearing a fresh uniform, 4 stripes shining under the morning light. The nameplate on the glass wall behind her read, "Captain Maya Daniels, Director of Flight Safety and Integrity." It didn't erase what she'd been through. It didn't undo the hurt. But it meant something. It meant the sky she had once reached for as a young cadet, as a girl listening to her father's stories about airfields and purpose. It was still hers. Not because they gave it to her, but because she took it, earned it, and never let go. That morning she joined a test flight out of Chicago, not as a monitor or guest, but as the one holding the control. As the engines roared to life, she looked out over the runway and thought of everyone who had tried to make her wait outside, of every whispered doubt, every door closed in her face, and she smiled, because now those same doors were behind her, the cockpit ahead, the horizon wide open. She turned to her young first officer, a woman named Tasha, with bright eyes and steady hands, and said, "Clear skies today, First Officer William." Tasha nodded. "Couldn't ask for better." As they lifted off, Maya's heart stayed grounded only by one truth. Integrity doesn't always rise fast, but when it does, it climbs higher than fear, faster than silence, and stronger than any lie pretending to be tradition. And at 36,000 feet, with sunlight dancing across the wings, she knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something else, something better. Something built not just on trust in machines, but on trust in people who refuse to be grounded. The cabin lights dimmed as Atlantic Airways Flight 207 cut through the early dawn sky, cruising smoothly at 36 feet above the clouds. The hum of the engines wrapped around the aircraft like a lullaby, steady and calm as if even the plane itself knew who was at the controls. Captain Maya Daniels sat in the left seat of the cockpit, her hands resting lightly on the yoke, her eyes scanning the sky with practiced ease. Across from her in the right seat sat First Officer Tasha Williams, a young black woman with sharp instincts and quiet confidence, barely a year out of flight school. Maya watched her go through the systems check again, not because she didn't trust her, but because she knew the importance of muscle memory, of rhythm, of making each flight feel like home. It was the first time they'd flown together, but something about it already felt right. Like a baton being passed, not out of duty, but out of belief. Maya leaned slightly toward her and spoke in a voice both gentle and firm. "The sky belongs to all of us, First Officer Williams. Never forget that." Tasha looked up, her expression softening. She'd heard stories about Captain Daniels. Everyone in the new generation of pilots had some thought of her as a hero, others as a cautionary tale. But sitting next to her now, hearing those words, Tasha felt something deeper. Permission. Permission to belong, permission to lead, permission to take space without apology. Maya turned back to the horizon, where the sun was just beginning to paint the edge of the sky in warm gold. It was the kind of view that reminded her why she had fought so hard, not just to get here, but to make sure others could follow. The seat beneath her wasn't just a chair, it was a platform. And this flight, like every flight now, carried more than passengers. It carried purpose. Somewhere over Colorado, during a brief lull in air traffic control chatter, her cockpit screen pinged with a message. An email. She glanced at the sender and paused. Richard Whitmore. She hesitated, then tapped to open it. The words were brief but unmistakably sincere. Captain Daniels, it began. You may be surprised to hear from me. After months of reflection, during what I can only describe as the hardest period of my life, I feel compelled to say what I never had the courage to say before. I was wrong. About you. About what I thought professionalism looked like. About what I believed leadership required. You showed me something I refused to see. Your courage forced me to confront the very parts of myself I had worked hard to excuse. For whatever it's worth, I am sorry. The industry is better because you didn't let people like me stop you. Maya stared at the message, emotions stirring deep within her. Not anger, not triumph, but something quieter, something closer to release. She thought about that day in the briefing room when he told her to wait outside. About the sting of humiliation, the heat in her throat as she stepped away from a flight she had earned. And now, here he was, acknowledging what she already knew, never expected him to say. She didn't reply right away. Some messages deserve silence, at least for a moment. She saved it quietly and returned her attention to the sky. Below, mountains shifted into plains and cities woke under soft morning light. She imagined her father, long gone now, watching from somewhere higher than even the highest flight path, nodding with that same pride he used to show every time she returned home in uniform. They told you the sky was the limit, he once told her. But the real limit, baby girl, is what they think you deserve. Prove them wrong, and she had, over and over again. But what mattered most wasn't that she'd broken through, it was that she'd left the door open behind her. After they landed in San Francisco, Maya stayed back in the cockpit while the passengers disembarked. Tasha lingered too, glancing at her captain with hesitation. Permission to ask something personal, Captain? Maya smiled. Go ahead. How did you not give up when it got ugly? When no one believed you? When they tried to break you? Naya looked at her, not with a rehearsed answer but with the truth. I remembered who I was before they tried to define me, and I remembered why I started flying in the first place. It was never about them. Tasha nodded slowly, her voice quieter now. I'm glad you didn't stop. Me too, Naya said. But now it's your turn to keep it going. You fly well. You fly right, and you fly so high that no one ever forgets your name. Outside the cockpit window, ground crews moved with practiced purpose. Another flight was being prepped, another journey ready to begin. Maya stepped out into the terminal with her bag in hand, the gold stripes on her sleeve catching the afternoon. A little girl pointed from behind a row of seats and whispered something to her mother. Maya smiled and nodded gently. A year ago, that moment wouldn't have happened. A year ago, she was being told to wait. But today, she walked through every door with her head high, and each one she opened, she held just a little longer, so someone else could walk through too. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey with Captain Maya Daniels. If her story inspired you even a little, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Justice Stories for more true stories of courage, resilience, and rising above. We've got more skies to fly and more truths to tell. Together.